My name is Avery Collins, and the night my parents said we don't need your money was the night I finally understood how carefully they'd been rewriting our story. It was my father's 65th birthday dinner, held at my parents' house in Plano, Texas, the same house I'd quietly helped keep out of foreclosure years ago. The dining room was packed with relatives, half-empty wine glasses, and the kind of forced laughter that always comes with family gatherings where everyone is pretending a little too hard. I had arrived early, as usual, brought a gift, helped set the table, slipped into the familiar role of being useful without being noticed. Halfway through dinner, my aunt asked the question she always asked. "So, how are things going for everyone these days?" Before I could answer, my mother smiled and gestured toward my younger brother, Ethan, sitting comfortably at the other end of the table. "Ethan's doing great," she said proudly. Finally standing on his own 2 feet. Then she turned to me, still smiling but with a different tone. Lighter. Dismissive. "And Avery," she added, waving her hand slightly. "She worries too much. Always trying to help when no one asked." As FN action side. My father chuckled and raised his glass. "We don't need her money," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Never did. There it was. Clean. Public. Final. A few relatives laughed awkwardly. Someone nodded. Ethan avoided my eyes. I felt every pair of eyes flick toward me, waiting for a reaction. An argument. A defense. An apology, maybe. Instead, I smiled. Took a slow sip of my drink. Let the moment pass. Because what none of them knew, what they had never bothered to ask, was that I had been quietly covering the gaps since 2018 mortgage shortfalls. Utility bills. Emergency transfers sent late at night so no one else would find out. They didn't need my money. That's what they believed. And for the first time, I realized how fragile that belief really was. I didn't always plan to become my parents' safety net. In 2018, it happened quietly, the way most long-term damage does, without announcements, without witnesses, and without gratitude. That spring, my mother called me late one night. Not crying. Just tired. She said the words carefully, like if she chose them right, they wouldn't sound like what they were. "We're just a little behind this month," she told me. "It's nothing serious." I knew better. My father had retired earlier than expected after a minor stroke. Medical bills piled up faster than they admitted. Property taxes on the house in Plano had increased, and my parents were living on a fixed income that no longer stretched the way it used to. I offered to help once. Just once. I told myself it would be temporary. I transferred enough to cover the mortgage gap that month. No memo. No explanation. I didn't want to bruise their pride. The next month there was another call. Then another. Utilities. Insurance. Prescription refills that somehow didn't go through. Each time, I stepped in quietly, convincing myself I was being responsible, not taken advantage of. By the end of that year, I had set up automatic transfers. Small amounts, spread out, designed not to raise questions if anyone ever looked too closely. I told no one. Not my brother Ethan. Not my extended family. I didn't want to embarrass my parents or turn money into leverage. Over time, the help stopped being discussed at all. It became assumed. Expected. Like gravity. What hurt wasn't the money, it was the way my role slowly disappeared from the family narrative. When things stabilized, my parents talked about budgeting better. When the lights stayed on, it was because they were managing just fine now. My contributions were edited out, like they'd never existed. Meanwhile, Ethan was praised for every small step forward. A new job. A raise. A vacation he couldn't afford on his own. My parents spoke about his independence with pride, while my help remained invisible by design. I am parents' beret. I played along. I showed up. I smiled. I kept paying, because I thought love meant not keeping score. I didn't realize that by protecting their dignity for so long, I had also made it easy for them to deny the truth entirely. Once I noticed the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. My parents had become experts at rewriting reality in a way that kept them comfortable and kept me quiet. Any mention of finances was brushed aside with practiced ease. "We're fine now," my mother would say whenever I asked how they were managing. "We've learned to live within our means." If I offered to help with something specific, repairs on the house, a medical bill, my father would wave it off. "Don't worry about us," he'd say. "You need to focus on your own life." But behind the scenes, nothing had changed. The automatic transfers kept going, the late night just this once messages never stopped. The help was accepted privately and denied publicly, as if acknowledging it would somehow make them smaller. At the same time, Ethan became the centerpiece of every family story. When he struggled, it was framed as potential. When he succeeded, it was celebrated as proof of resilience. My parents spoke about him with a pride that filled the room, even when the facts didn't fully support the narrative. If I ever hinted at imbalance, at how much responsibility I was carrying, I was met with confusion. "You're imagining things," my mother said once, genuinely offended. "We've never asked you for anything." Another time she laughed softly and added, "You always like to play the martyr." That word stayed with me. Martyr. It was easier for them to believe I was dramatic than to admit they were dependent. Easier to paint me as overly sensitive than to confront how much they relied on me while refusing to acknowledge it. The most disorienting part was how calmly it all happened. No shouting, no cruelty that could be pointed to. Just small, repeated moments of denial that made me question my own memory. I'd check my bank app. Confirm the transfers. Reassure myself that I wasn't imagining the numbers. Still, when family gathered, the story stayed the same. My parents were self-sufficient. Ethan was thriving. And I was. Well-meaning, but unnecessary. I learned to swallow my discomfort. To doubt my own perception. To accept that if everyone else insisted something wasn't happening, maybe I was the problem. That's what gaslighting looks like when it's wrapped in politeness. And by the time I fully understood it, I had already been living inside it for years. The moment that finally crossed the line didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, wrapped in laughter, the way the most damaging things often do. It happened a few weeks after my father's birthday. At a small family lunch meant to celebrate nothing in particular. Just one of those gatherings my parents liked to host to prove to themselves, mostly, that everything was fine. We were seated around the kitchen island when my mother started talking about money again. Not struggling. Not stress. Pride. "We've learned a lot these past few years," she said, slicing bread with careful precision. "You get to a point where you realize you don't need help from anyone." My father nodded in agreement. "People these days lean on their kids too much." "We never did that." Then, he looked straight at me. "Avery's always offering," he added, almost amused. "But we don't need it, she just worries." There it was again. The lie, repeated so often it had become muscle memory. This time, no one even looked uncomfortable. A cousin smiled. Someone chuckled. Ethan scrolled on his phone, detached and silent. I felt something inside me go very still. For years, I had protected their pride. I had hidden the truth so they wouldn't feel small, so the family image could stay intact. I told myself I was doing the right thing. But in that moment, I understood the cost. My silence had made it possible for them to erase my role entirely, and to do it without hesitation. I didn't argue. I didn't correct them. I didn't pull out my phone or point to bank statements. I finished my drink. Helped clear the table. Hugged everyone goodbye. And on the drive home, I made a decision so quiet it felt almost unreal. If they truly didn't need my help, then I would stop giving it. Not as punishment. Not as revenge. But as truth. For the first time since 2018, I chose not to protect the lie they were living in. I chose to let reality speak for itself. I didn't announce anything. I didn't warn them. I didn't ask for a conversation that would only turn into denial and defensiveness. I simply stopped. The following Monday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee going cold beside me. One by one, I logged into the accounts I hadn't looked at closely in years, not because I didn't know they were there, but because acknowledging them always came with a familiar knot of guilt. The mortgage transfer went first. Then the utilities. Then the smaller, scattered payments that added up more than I ever admitted out loud. I turned off the automatic transfers, double-checked the dates, and closed each tab without ceremony. No messages. No explanations. I told myself that if they truly didn't need my money, nothing would change. The first few days were silent. No calls. No texts. I almost wondered if I'd imagined the entire situation, if maybe they really had found another way and my help had quietly become unnecessary. Then the small signs started to appear. My mother called, not asking for money but asking questions. Casual ones. Have you heard anything about property taxes going up again? Do you know if utility companies charge late fees right away or after a grace period? I answered vaguely. Non-committal. Polite. A week later, my father mentioned in passing that the bank had made an error, a temporary issue. Nothing to worry about. I said nothing. By the second week, the tone shifted. The calls came more often. The pauses grew longer. Conversations circled the same topics without landing anywhere solid. Still, no one asked me directly for help. They couldn't, not without admitting the truth they'd denied so publicly. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. I wasn't waiting for them to fail. I wasn't hoping for panic. I was watching what happened when the safety net disappeared and no one could pretend it hadn't existed. For the first time in years, my bank account stayed untouched. No emergency transfers, no late-night decisions made out of obligation. I slept better than I had in a long time. Not because I enjoyed the silence but because I had finally stopped carrying a responsibility that was never acknowledged in the first place. And somewhere beneath the quiet, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth demanded to be faced. The confrontation didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, pressure accumulating until there was nowhere left for it to go. 3 weeks after I stopped the transfers, my father called and asked if I could come by the house. His voice was controlled, but strained in a way I hadn't heard before. Just to talk, he said. Nothing serious. I agreed. When I arrived, my parents were already seated at the dining table, the same one where they'd so confidently declared they didn't need my help. The house felt different, quieter, heavier. Papers were spread out in front of them. Envelopes. Notices they hadn't bothered to hide. My mother didn't waste time. There's been some confusion, she said carefully. With the bank, and a few other things. I waited. My father cleared his throat. We noticed some payments stopped coming through. The ones you used to help with. There it was. Not an accusation. Not gratitude. Just an observation. I nodded once. Yes. They did. My mother frowned, as if the answer didn't fit the script she'd rehearsed. Was that a mistake? No, I said calmly. It wasn't. The silence that followed felt brittle. My father shifted in his chair. My mother's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I thought you said you didn't need my money. I continued. Evenly. I took you at your word. I have free. And Alda's mine. That was when the defenses came up. We didn't mean it like that, my mother said quickly. You know that. My father added, families help each other. That's different. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I agree, I said. Which is why I think we should be honest now. I opened a spreadsheet I'd prepared weeks earlier but hoped I'd never have to use. I turned the screen toward them. Since January 2018, I said, I've covered mortgage shortfalls, utilities, insurance, and medical expenses. Quietly. Consistently. I scrolled. Every transfer is dated. Every amount documented. My mother leaned forward. Her face drained of color as the numbers filled the screen. Month after month. Year after year. Totals at the bottom. My father stared at the screen, unmoving. That can't be right, my mother whispered. It is, I replied. I double-checked. It's not. I named the total out loud. I won't repeat it here, but it was enough to erase any remaining illusion of independence. The room went completely silent. No denial this time. No jokes. No dismissive smiles. Just the truth, laid out in black and white, impossible to wave away. My father finally spoke, his voice barely audible. We didn't realize it had been that much. I closed the laptop. You didn't want to, I said gently. Because realizing it would have meant acknowledging it. End quote. Neither of them looked at me then. They looked at the table. At the papers. At the reality they had insisted didn't exist. For the first time since 2018, I wasn't explaining. I wasn't justifying. I wasn't protecting anyone's pride. The numbers had spoken. And there was nothing left to deny. The silence didn't last long. It never does. Once the numbers sank in, panic rushed to fill the space where denial had lived for years. My mother was the first to speak, her voice tight and defensive. "You could have told us," she said. "You didn't have to just stop like that." My father followed quickly, frustration replacing shock. "This could have been handled better. We're family." There it was, the shift. Not "thank you." Not "we were wrong." Just blame, redirected neatly back onto me. They talked over each other, rewriting the past in real time. The comments at dinner had been misunderstood. The pride had been misread. They'd always appreciated my help, of course they had. When I didn't respond, my mother's tone softened. "We didn't mean to make you feel unimportant." I noticed what was missing. No apology. No ownership. And Ethan, the one they'd praised so loudly, was suddenly nowhere to be found. No calls, no messages. No offer to step in. The weight of it settled quietly. They weren't upset about what they'd said. They were upset that the safety net was gone. And for the first time, I didn't rush to catch them. I left my parents' house that day without raising my voice and without making promises I knew I wouldn't keep. The conversation hadn't ended in resolution, but it had ended in truth, and that was enough. I didn't cut them off completely. I didn't issue ultimatums. I simply made my boundaries clear. I would help again only if help was acknowledged, discussed, and respected. No more silence. No more pretending. They didn't like that. I could tell. But for the first time, their discomfort wasn't mine to manage. On the drive home, I realized how much of my identity had been built around being useful, reliable, invisible. I'd mistaken endurance for love and responsibility for obligation. Choosing dignity didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet, steady. I learned that support given without honesty becomes exploitation, and love that requires self-erasure isn't love at all. I didn't need permission to step back. I needed the courage to stop explaining myself. And that, finally, was something I gave freely to myself. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something honestly. Do you think I did the right thing? For years, I believed that staying silent was the same as being loving. Now I know better. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever been the invisible supporter, the one who gives without being seen, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. Here's what I learned. Helping without boundaries teaches people to ignore your worth. Love should never require self-erasure. If this story helped you reflect on your own life, support the channel by liking, subscribing, and joining the conversation. Your interaction keeps stories like this alive and reminds others they're not alone.